Well, hello and welcome to today's book review. A little bit behind on my book reviews. I've got a stack that are waiting, that I have read and are waiting to be reviewed. We'll work on getting those out. But today we're going to be reviewing Mouse. This is by Art Spiegelman, published in 1991. It's in two volumes with a total of 296 pages, published by Pantheon Books. Now, it's a nonfiction book that was presented in what today we call a graphic novel. We used to call them comic books. It was written by American cartoonist Art Spiegelman, and he originally did it over about a 10 or 11 year period as a serial or a series. And it depicts him interviewing his father about his father's experience as a Polish Jew during the Holocaust in the Second World War. In the book, the title comes from the fact that Jews are depicted as mice, and as you can see from the volume there with the swastika, the Nazis are portrayed as cats. And there's some pigs in there too that factor into the story as well. Now, this is not normally the kind of book I review on this channel, but I felt like it needed to be discussed for a couple of reasons. Just to give you my background, I am of partial Jewish ancestry. My brother is an ordained rabbi, and I am also, when it comes to in terms of civil rights, for the most part, I'm a First Amendment absolutist. I pretty much believe the First Amendment means what it says, and it says what it means. And I will defend the right of someone to publicize their thoughts, their ideas, even if I don't agree with them. And there's a lot of people, quite frankly, I wish they would go away, but I will still defend their right to express their views publicly. Now, this is what got me onto the book. I had never heard of the book until January of 2022 when this incident happened in Tennessee, where a school board removed this book due to what it said was language and nudity concerns. And that picture there is Art Spiegelman. This was actually a videoed interview that CNN had on their webpage, and I just screenshotted it. And this is the quote from the offended school board, or one of the offended school board members, Tony Ullman, McMinn County school board member. He said, "It shows people hanging, it shows them killing kids. Why does the educational system promote this kind of stuff? It is not wise or healthy. Being in the schools, educators and stuff, we don't need to enable or somewhat promote this stuff." Now, I really don't know beyond that what his problem is. When I first read this, I thought this was pretty stupid. We're talking about the Holocaust. Okay, this was not just an argument between neighbors. This was something where a total, we'll probably never know the exact total, but somewhere around 17 million people perished. It's not just Jews perished in the Holocaust. They were the single largest group, but there were others in there who perished as well. It shows people hanging. That's what the Nazis did. It shows them killing kids. That's what the Nazis did. Why does the educational system promote this kind of stuff? Well, probably because the educational system doesn't want this sort of thing to happen again. We don't want people to be persecuted and genocide committed because of their religion or their race or their political views or whatever. So Mr. Ullman here seems rather short-sighted in his analysis of this. And then here's this article out of something called the Jewish News of Northern California. I'd never heard of it until I was researching for this review. But it says that Mouse is the latest victim of conservative curriculum wars, and it's not just conservatives doing this, by the way. You got a lot of liberals out there that are trying to get classic American authors like Mark Twain and F. Scott Fitzgerald and others yanked out of the libraries too. So this is going on really on both sides. Now, it says in here that he objected to. It's not on here, but he was Oh, there it is. I think in the first paragraph. Tennessee School Board voted unanimously to remove Mouse, Art Spiegelman's graphic novel about his father's Holocaust experience, from its curriculum after board members raised objections about curse words, nude drawings, and not wise or healthy content within it. Now, I didn't really pay attention or notice the nude content until I saw the interview that CNN did with Spiegelman, and he mentioned it. And then I saw it here in this article, so I'm going to see if you can find it. It's on this page because I had to go looking for it. to figure out from Siegelman's description. I was able to find it, but see if you can see it on this page. Because if you can't, then I'll go ahead and we'll highlight it here. But it's right here in this panel. You can see a little bit of a woman's breast, but also notice right here, there's this dark substance. That's blood. This is him depicting his mother's suicide in 1968. That was in the winter of 68. Spiegelman suffered a brief but very intensive nervous breakdown. He cut short his university studies. He's even admitted at the time he was dropping LSD pretty frequently. And he spent a month at a New York State mental hospital. And upon his release, he went to stay with his parents. That was a condition. And it was shortly after his release, it was May of 1968, his mother committed suicide after her last surviving brother died. And that triggered a whole series of events and mental and emotional events for him. And this is just a little bit closer. And I did not, and as I said, I did not see this when I was reading through it. I did notice the body in the tub, and I realized that this was depicting a suicide. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about appropriateness in that here shortly. Most of the book weaves in and out of the present and goes back to the past. You see this a lot in movies and documentaries where you've got two people talking and then the old days come up or the old country or whatever, and then they do flashback scenes of what life was like earlier. Art Spiegelman started to interview his father. I think it's Vladek is how you pronounce his name. It's Vladek in 1978 and 79. And then, so the story begins, he's talking to his father, and then it goes back to the 1930s, and then it comes back to the what would then be the present, the late 70s, and then goes back and forth. And it begins in the mid 30s and goes up through the end of the Second World War. Now, before he started writing this, his father's story, they were estranged. There was not a good relationship there. It's complex. You'll need to read the book to find out what was all involved in that. Now, after his wife's suicide, Vladek eventually remarried a woman called Mala. And Art asked Vladek to recount his Holocaust experiences in here. And he starts in 1937 when he married his first wife, Anna. And he, with the help of the family, her family was rather wealthy, and he was able to start a manufacturing business. And then they had their first child. I think the name is pronounced Rishu. It's Richieu. And there's a lot of Polish names of places in here that I don't know how to pronounce because I don't speak Polish. But this shortly after the birth of this first son, Anna went into a very deep and very severe postpartum depression, and that seemed to set the course for the rest of her life. Plus, going through the Holocaust. And in those days, from what I can tell, things like postpartum depression were not taken seriously. You just were supposed to, just buck up and get over it, basically, and move on. Mental health in those days was nothing like what it is now. And even now, we've got a lot of misconceptions, but that's another discussion for another time. In 1939, Vladek was drafted into the Polish army. War was definitely coming. Hitler had pretty much gobbled up most of Eastern Europe. Poland was about all that was left. And so the war started, and Vladek was taken prisoner and had to ferry dead and wounded German soldiers back to hospitals and that sort of thing. And then eventually, of course, long story short, you'll have to read the book to get all this. He eventually ended up in a concentration camp. He ended up at Auschwitz, which was the worst of the worst of the worst. And then when the war ends and the survivors are freed, Vladek and Anna actually reunite. They end up in the United States. I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, Art Spiegelman was actually born in, I think it was Finland. I'm doing that from memory, but I'm pretty sure he was born in Europe before the family immigrated to the United States. Now, let's talk about some things about the book that I like. I do like the graphic format. I have heard of these for about 20 years now. We've seen these graphic novels or really glorified comic books on the shelves, and I was kind of, yeah, right. But I like the way the story is told in the graphic novel format. I think it will be an attraction for younger audiences. I realize the book has been out now for about 30 years, and or I guess, yeah, 30 years. And the publicity caused by what the people in Tennessee did, I think I shot it to the top of Amazon's bestseller list. So you are going to have a whole new generation reading it, and I hope they take the message of the book seriously. I do like the first person account from his father. He didn't just sit there like he was doing a diary or something like that. He actually included his father in here. I like these kind of events from people who were there, who can tell you, I was there, I saw it, and not just be reading about it in a book. I do not think Spiegelman goes overboard in illustrating the details. For instance, his mother's suicide. I thought that was handled as well as it could be handled. He could have gotten a lot more graphic. He could have had the picture blown up big and had lots of blood and gore, but he didn't. I thought he kept it, but it was not done in a way that should provoke any kind of triggers or anything. I like the black and white color format. I think this is better than color. Like when they made Schindler's List, it was in black and white, except for that one scene with the girl in the very bright red coat. It shows really, I think, the general bleakness and hopelessness that many felt during the Holocaust and having to go through it. It's a good narration of his father's story. It emphasizes the atmosphere. It emphasizes his father. Um, he even has his father speaking in broken English in the comic book. So he did a very good job with that, and it is giving a good insight into what it's like being the child of a Holocaust survivor. Now, there were children that got caught up in the Holocaust and were sent to the camps. The youngest ones, if they were, say, in 1945, sent to a camp and were, say, 5 or 6 years old, today they're in their early 80s. So there are not that many left. I have met two Holocaust survivors in my life. Both of them have long since passed away. One was a social studies teacher at one of the high schools I went to, and the other was Helen Waterford, who traveled the country with Alphonse Heck. He was a member of the Hitler Youth, and there's a two-part series on the A&E network about Hitler, where Alphonse Heck is interviewed. And she ended up at Auschwitz. She was on the same train that took Anne Frank to Auschwitz, and they toured the United States in the early 80s, talking about their experiences. They were together on that tour. I do know some other people who are children of Holocaust survivors, and their children now are in their 60s and 70s. So we'll be losing them probably in the next 30 years. We're going to be losing more and more direct contacts with the Holocaust as time goes on. Now, what did I not like about the book? Well, here's the list. I mean, I really couldn't find anything, and I tried. I looked for things to not like, but I couldn't really find anything about it. It is very well done. But I will give you some cautions. You got to exercise discretion, particularly with your kids. I do not recommend the book for preteens. I would give this an R rating if I were giving it a movie rating, or at least PG-13. I think some teenagers might be able to handle it, but you're going to have to check that out on your own and make your own decisions for your kids. Also, allow discussion of the book. If someone in your circle, whether they're adult or teen, reads it and they're bothered by it, which could happen, it's heavy, it's intense, let them talk about it. And then some of the artwork is graphic. Like I said, I don't think he went overboard, but there are some graphic scenes of people hanging, and you just need to be aware of that. Now, when I review a book, I like to give it a rating 0 to 5 using a unique unit of measure that goes with the book. But I could not find anything in this book that would be appropriate to use, so I'm going to give it the old fashioned star rating. I'm going to go ahead and give it 5 stars. I think it's very well done. I think, especially because it is a first person account of the Holocaust. And the Holocaust is something that I think it needs to be remembered, and I think it needs to be forgotten. Now, what do I mean by that? It needs to be remembered in the sense we don't want it to happen again. But on the other hand, it didn't just happen yesterday. It is 80 years in the past. And we have to remember it did happen. Yes, it is like slavery in the United States, it's a blot on history. And it is something to be remembered that it did happen, but it didn't happen yesterday. It is 80 years in the past, but we just need to make safeguards that it doesn't happen again. So that's my take on the book. What do you think? If you've read the book, leave a comment in the comment section below. If you have a book you would like me to review, let me know the title. I generally do religious or spiritual type books on here, this book is an exception. That's all I have for this video. We'll see you in the next one. I'm out.